If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it.
One of the most prolific scorers in Knicks history officially has retired. Carmelo Anthony announced Monday that he is retiring from the NBA. He last played for the Los Angeles Lakers during the 2021-2022 season. Melo started his career in Denver, being drafted number 3 overall by the Nuggets. He would spend 7.5 years in Denver before being sent to New York in a blockbuster midseason trade with the Knicks. During his 7 years with the Knicks, Anthony averaged 24 points per game. He made 2 All-NBA appearances. He was selected as an NBA All-Star in each of his seasons in New York. Anthony's best season definitely came in 2013 for the Knicks when he led the league in scoring. He helped New York win 54 games and advance past the first round of the playoffs for the first time since 2000. That was a 13-year drought, with the Knicks being able to unable to advance past the first round. It was the only time that Melo's Knicks won a playoff series during his New York career. Anthony would be traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2018, and he finished his career with stops in Portland and Los Angeles. So, Tommy, I'm making it really simple here. You have one word to describe Carmelo Anthony's career. What word are you using?
I'll go with bucket. Like the phrase "bucket getter" is probably thrown around too loosely nowadays. But make no mistake, Carmelo Anthony, and has retired as one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. I mean, look no further than the fact that he's 9th all time in NBA scoring. Only 8 players in the history of the sport have scored more points in an NBA game. It's LeBron, Kareem, Karl Malone, Kobe, Michael Jordan, Dirk, Wilt, and Shaq. And then you have Melo. So, anytime you're on the top 10 list and one of the supreme, one of the elite scorers, one of the elite players of all time in your respective sport, you get a ton of credit, a ton of respect, well-deserved. Listen, he wasn't a perfect player. His defensive deficiencies obviously complicate things a little bit. But when it came to scoring the basketball and the team that scores the most points wins, Melo was right there. So a ton of respect today for what Melo did on the court. He'll get his flowers as he should.
Yeah, definitely going to give a nice round of applause for Carmelo Anthony on his retirement on this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods. If I'm going to use one word, I'm going to say star-crossed. And I know maybe that's a hyphenated word, maybe it's 2 words, but I'm going to break my own rules here and say star-crossed because I feel like Carmelo Anthony's career, we know him as a prolific scorer. We know him as Tommy said, a bucket, a true number 1 option. It's just unfortunate to me that things never are lined up for Melo to consistently make deep playoff runs, to make that NBA Finals appearance, to maybe win an NBA championship. Like you said, he's not a perfect player, but there are plenty of imperfect players that have led their team to NBA championships. And it's to me, it's a little sad that like he never got that chance to at least even get to the mountaintop. He got close in Denver, and then he ran into the Lakers. When I think about Melo's career, like he entered a Western Conference in 2004 that was an absolute beast. Dallas. You had New Orleans coming up with Chris Paul eventually when he came into the league. You had San Antonio, who nobody could get past. It was so many talented teams that when he was in Denver, it was just hard for the Nuggets to really crack through. And then once the Lakers, after their short rebuild after Shaq left, got back to being a championship contender, then that was the team you had to get by. And it was just too much talent in the Western Conference. And the Nuggets were unable to put together teams around him that could compete for a championship consistently. And he gets traded to New York, and you think things are going to work out there. And the Knicks weren't able to put a team around him to compete for a championship. So, and he's playing a conference with, Lamar James and the Miami Heat. So that's the thing I think about with Carmelo Anthony's career is star-crossed. I almost think of him almost like Tracy McGrady, though McGrady had even less playoff success. Like guys who had unbelievable talent, but because of their circumstances were never able to play on the ultimate stage, which I think in many ways I feel like basketball fans lost out on because Melo, in the right situation, as we saw with the Olympic team, he was a special player.
Totally agree. And it's a really good point because there's like a few points of, pivot points in Melo's journey.
Yep.
Obviously, one of the highest recruited players in the country, coming out of Oak Hill, goes to Syracuse, 20-10 as a freshman, carries the Orange to a national championship, somehow slips to third in the draft. Obviously, LeBron goes one, Darko
Yeah.
Milicic goes two, infamously.
Yeah.
You talk about entering the West. What if Carmelo gets drafted by that Pistons team with a championship core?
Exactly.
Could they have gone on a run? Could they have won a couple championships? You replaced Carmelo with Darko Milicic and kind of refix that roster with a young
Yeah.
rising Melo. And Melo was averaging 28 points by the time he was 22, 23 years old.
Yeah.
So he was ready to contribute right away. So instead, he goes to Denver, a team which hadn't been successful, won 17 games the year before, wins 43 in Melo's first year. Uh, One of the cool Melo stats that rookie season, he was the first player to lead the first rookie to lead his team in scoring and lead that team to the postseason since David Robinson with the Spurs about
Yep.
15 years earlier. The other kind of inflection point in Carmelo's career, instead of signing a 3-year off his rookie contract, instead of signing a contract with a 3-year and then a player option
Yep.
prior to that fourth season, Melo wanted to lock in that fourth season for whatever reason, want to secure the bag, as the kids say. And because of that, was not a free agent at the same time as D Wade and LeBron and Bosh, the other guys in that class. That
Yeah.
Obviously Wade, Melo went 3, Wade went 4, Bosh went 5. Because he was, if it's not for that, if he just had that player option, still would have made the same amount of money. Obviously, barring an injury, whatever, he would have been the third banana with LeBron and D Wade. You have to assume they would have figured out a way, or with one of those guys or two of those guys,
Yeah.
that would have all played itself out far different. And you hit your star next to LeBron, you have a perfect complementary piece in Melo. And then lastly, you have the amnesty situation regarding Chauncey Billups and the Knicks,
Yep.
and how that complicated everything, and that kind of messed up, so to speak, the kind of Knicks project, building around Carmelo. So there's a few key things that had gone a little bit differently, had gone a little bit this way or a little bit that way. Melo would have been in a much better position to win. As it stands, he doesn't have those accolades. Not only did he not win a championship, never got to play in a championship. And as you mentioned, we saw what he did. Most outstanding player as a freshman with Syracuse.
Yep.
37-point game, Team USA, with the highest individual 10 3-pointers that game against Nigeria 2008. So had another 30-point game. Was the USA's all-time leading scorer till Kevin Durant passed them back in 2021. So it's a shame that Melo never really got a chance to shine in that kind of bright spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, people know how much I love Marvel superheroes. I'm actually wearing a Spider-Man shirt today. People can't see. So I know I love superheroes, I love stuff. And I feel like for me, Carmelo Anthony would be the perfect player to do a what if comic book, or like a what if cartoon on that Marvel does on Disney Plus, because like there are so many what if moments in Carmelo Anthony's career that if they change one way or another, maybe he's an NBA champion. Again, it starts with, like you said, the Detroit Pistons not picking him to go number 2 as opposed to him going number 3 to Denver. Detroit had a championship roster, and they maybe would have been a dynasty if they would have had Carmelo Anthony. Like that's an inflection point. You mentioned the trade to the Knicks and the decision for Melo not to wait till free agency because he was worried about the lockout. Instead, he wanted to make the trade now and force Knicks to give up so many assets to get him. You mentioned the fact that he signed the full 5-year deal as opposed to signing the 3+1 deal that Melo, Wade, and Bosh had signed. How much that changes his career. How much Knicks' decision to amnesty Chauncey Billups. I mean, there are like literally, there may be 6 or 7 moments in his career that one thing flips a different way, and he's an entirely different career. What if he enters the NBA straight out of high school? Like, he was a guy a lot of people looked at and said, hey, he could be a guy that could go straight from the NBA, straight from high school to the NBA. And he probably would have been a number 2 pick in the draft as opposed to being number 3. He was Yao was number 1 year before. What happens if he goes number 2? How does that change his career? Like, so his career, I think, of almost maybe any player in the NBA history is when you can look at it multiple times and say, hey, if one thing goes a different way, like this is entirely different. Why do you think the Knicks struggled so much to build a winner around Carmelo?
Well, we talked about the things that have gone against, Carmelo, kind of the breaks that went his way, and it doesn't seem like any of them went his way. We also have to shoulder, Melo has to shoulder some responsibility for the way things played out in New York.
Yeah.
One, as you mentioned, demanding the trade prior to entering free agency when he would have had the opportunity to sign with the Knicks and they would have kept all their pieces intact. That obviously gets factored into the decision in terms of why the Knicks were never able to complete a successful complete roster with sustained success. Again, not putting this in context, the Knicks didn't win a single playoff game in the 9 years before Carmelo arrived. They only won one playoff game in the 5 years after he left. We took the team to 3 straight, postseasons, won 54 games, 2012, 2013. The only time this millennium the Knicks have won 50 plus games. But again, there were higher expectations, and when you have a player that's top 10 all time in scoring, those expectations get ratcheted up, and rightfully so. That being said, the other thing that worked against Melo, it was his rigidity. He didn't want to accept moving to that power 4 spot.
Yes.
When that would have put his team in the best position to succeed. Whether himself, he didn't want to do the physical pounding on guarding bigger, stronger power forwards. He wanted a little more, a little bit less of a difficult assignment on that end.
Yes.
I think that works against him. We talked about the Chauncey Billups thing. So it's kind of a confluence of factors. And, again, Melo not committing as much to the defensive end of the floor. Just when you play a style that's kind of an ISO style, it can be difficult to bring in surrounding players and complementary pieces. But those have to be weighed as factors as well.
Yeah, in many ways, I feel like him and Dirk almost have like very similar issues and things you complain about their careers, but like Dirk was fortunate enough that Dallas found the right team to build around him, and it was like in many ways like the perfect team to build around him that wasn't a super team, like a team that like you had the right point guard, you had the right 6 man, you had the right center to help him on the defensive end, you had the right wings who can guard multiple guys and guard the fours like with Sean Marion, like Melo. As someone who loved Dirk Nowitzki during that time, like I used to always feel like Melo needs like that team. Like he needs, if you would have put him on that Dallas Maverick team, maybe they beat the Heat because that would have been a perfect fit for him as well. Like it just seemed like the Knicks were unable to kind of put the pieces together. When they got Chandler, it forced them to lose their point guard and Billups, and they weren't able to overcome the fact that now they were going to be capped out because they decided to amnesty him instead of letting him just expire. Like there were so many different issues. And then Phil Jackson came in, and I feel like as time goes on, it's really kind of wild to see just how much like the Phil Jackson thing went off the rails. Like it was bad at the time, but the Knicks the year before, I know they missed the playoffs the following year. They only won 37 games. But then Phil Jackson comes in, and it is just an absolute disaster. 17 wins, 32 wins, 31 wins. Like teams at 29 wins, and then of course he was fired at that point. Steve Mills came in. Like the Knicks went from being a semi-competitive team, maybe a team that was underachieving a little bit, but a team that was getting to the playoffs every year, to a team that just was not even competing. Essentially wasted the last good years of Carmelo Anthony's career. In many ways, Phil Jackson's leadership and how he kind of ran the Knicks into the ground really ended up derailing what should have been more competent years with Carmelo Anthony playing on bigger stages in the postseason and maybe making a run. I think that Phil Jackson's part in it really maybe goes kind of underrated, given all the talk about how he didn't want to Melo didn't want to justify insanity and a lot of things about and I've said all the things that Melo has done wrong, but that Phil Jackson hiring ended up just completely tanking the rest of Melo's career.
Yeah, listen, Phil was not a good hire in retrospect. Obviously, we know that now. It's probably a combination of the style of play and the player.
Yeah.
Right? And again, it's one of those things, one of many things that just kind of tweaked. Went one bounce here, one kind of turn there, sliding doors moment that went the opposite way as Melo would have hoped.
Where do you rank Melo among the greatest Knicks of all time? It's an interesting ranking because he's up there among the highest scorers of all time, but he doesn't have some of the championships other guys have. He doesn't have the finals appearance that Ewing has. So how do you juxtapose where Melo ranks in terms of all-time Knicks?
Yeah, I have him lower than most, probably lower than far most actually. I have him eighth in terms of all time Knicks
Wow.
rankings. So I'll run you down my seven just so I can give you some little explanation. At seven, I
Okay.
got Harry Gallatin. This goes back to the 50s. Made three straight finals. His first few years in the league. Played in 610 consecutive regular season games, 57 straight postseason games. Was an All-Star 7 straight seasons from 51 through 50, from 1950 to 1957. Again,
History lesson from Mr. Tommy Beer.
there you go.
How many of you guys had Henry Gallatin on your Harry Gallatin on your list? Come on.
If we're, I understand a lot of folks today want to, say the history, if it's before Magic and Bird didn't exist, but the reality is it does. So I tried to, for full disclosure, I did this list last off season. I ranked the top 75 Knicks of all time. So I ranked each, going down one by one. I tried to look at history and individual performance and postseason success. It gets complicated because, again, fewer teams in the 1950s and easier to make the All-Star team, easier to advance the postseason, etc. But, when this is a guy, Gallatin was a monster, Harry the Horse, averaged 15 rebounds per game in
Yeah.
53, 54. Number 6, I got Bernard King. I don't think we have to talk too much about him. Again, not only was he legit scorer, incredible scorer like Carmelo, he would be top 10 too if he hadn't had his injuries. But he was also, he scored in big moments and big spots. Obviously, the series against the Pistons is legendary.
Yeah.
And he's had some postseason success, not overwhelming postseason success, similar to Carmelo, but I thought those two are close. I give a slight edge to Bernard King. Richie Guerin, I got at number 5. When you talk about all-around production, Guerin was a monster.
Yes.
1962, 1961, 62, he played in that same era as the Big O and Wilt and those guys. So he's not thought of in that same class, nor should he be. But make no mistake, one of only 4 players in NBA history to average at least 29 points, 6 assists, and 6 rebounds over the course of the season. The only 3 other players in that club are Oscar Robertson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. During his prime from 1957 through 1962, Guerin averaged 7.2 rebounds and 6 assists per game, played in 6 consecutive All-Star games. Again, this guy did it all, contributed on the glass, distributing the basketball, scoring. Those are really impressive numbers. I don't need to say. That goes without saying, obviously. And then my top 4, I got the Busher, who I think is probably one of the most underappreciated,
Underrated.
disrespected Knicks of all time. In terms of, again, we're factoring regular season production, the turn kind of, we talk about pivot points. The Knicks changing from a good team to a great team was the trade that brought Dave the Busher 2 world championships. He was integral part of both of those squads. So it's hard to overstate his importance on the club. And again, those 2 titles, tip him over the top. And then obviously you have the top 3 of Reed, Frazier, and Ewing.
I mean, I think that's fair. I agree. I think a lot of people have him a lot higher. I would have Melo over Gallatin only because of how little the league was integrated when Gallatin played. I think that's a factor when I think of ranking certain guys. So again, 7-time All-Star, 7 straight, I believe. So a great player, but the league was very different, obviously, back then. So I put him ahead of him. The Busher and King arguments, I think, are the ones that are the tipping point, I think, for a lot of people when it comes to like where you rank him from there. And I agree. I actually have Guerin over him as well. But the more, and maybe I'm becoming a Melo sympathizer here, but like the BK Melo discussion, I think needs to be revisited in terms of ranking all-time Knicks, because as you mentioned, and you make a fair point about King having the run against against the Pistons and then taking the Celtics to 7 games, but like that run with the Knicks was short. I mean, it in terms of his prime, and obviously it was an injury that factored in. But you're talking about a prime that was really 4 years essentially, and 1 year where he was a guy averaging 32 before he got hurt. The year before that, he averaged 26. I mean, Melo led the league in scoring. Well, 28. He took the Knicks to multiple postseasons. I feel like if you look at Melo's totality, I think his numbers are better than Bernard King's in terms of Knick career. So I think I would have Melo over Bernard King. He can't help that Bernard King got hurt, but 3 years he gets hurt and then he comes back for the end of the '87 season. I just think Melo multiple playoff appearances, lead the league in scoring, multiple All NBAs. They're very close, but I think I would lean Melo slightly. And then when we get to and then the Busher is a tough one because that really comes down to like, what do you value? Do you value a guy who's an integral piece of a championship, or do you value a guy who is like, maybe individually one of the top players in the NBA? I think I could live with the Busher over Melo because the Busher was like a 3-time All-Star before he got to New York. Like, this guy was a star player in the NBA, and then he gets to New York and he takes him over the top. So I can live with the Bushers. I think that that leaves me around 6 for Carmelo Anthony. I think is a very respectable spot, obviously. But I think that a lot of people listening to this podcast will be upset. They'll probably be like, what the hell? How's Melo not in the top 5? But I agree. He's not touching Ewing, Clyde, or the captain, of course, Willis Reed.
Yeah.
And then I'll be honest, I think Earl Monroe also is gonna be kind of gonna be in that conversation as well. He would probably be right there around 8 or 7 too. So it's tough. I feel like once you get to that top 3, then there's like the next crop that includes like a lot of guys we named, and Melo sits somewhere around there.
As far as the Busher thing goes, yeah, it's difficult. You're kind of weighing intangibles. But in terms of overall impact on the game, this is where I got to knock Melo down a couple notches. Dave DeBusschere, not only was he made 8 All-Star games in his career, he was named to the NBA's All Defensive First Team the first 6 years of his existence. So like you talk about impact defensively, and that's obviously one of the reasons why the Knicks were great, and not only in the regular season, but just, continued sustained postseason success, as 2 titles will attest. One of the backbones of the team, obviously, you can't, it's all the captain and Frazier, taking nothing away from those guys. DeBusschere was an integral part of those teams and allowed those guys, greater flexibility to kind of focus on the offensive end, knowing that you had a lockdown backline defense in the Busher, who's skilled for his defensive versatility. But again, listen, in terms of a player, like Carmelo Anthony is probably more talented than just about anybody. Probably more talented than Willis Reed. But it's ability to put it together, ability to put it together consistently, sacrifice for the team. Sometimes sacrifice those scoring stats. And as far as the King. Melo comparisons, very, very difficult to choose between those two. Very similar, you're right. Limited combination. If I were to push back, I'd point out that Melo was led the league in scoring, but Bernard King did as well, averaged 32.9 in 84-85, along with 5.8 rebounds, shot 53% from the floor during that season. And of course, the 1984 playoff run, 12 games total, averaged 34.8 points, shot 57% from the floor, which is just 58% from the floor.
I've said it. His number needs to be in the rafters. Bernard King was just a dominant offensive player. It's tough. Those 2 guys are the guy. I love those conversations between Melo and King because they're so similar. They both played on like really poorly constructed teams around them, and with Bernard King, I think sometimes he gets the benefit of the doubt when it comes to, the injury didn't allow him to see what could have become with the Knicks. And to Bernard King's credit, Melo won 1 playoff series in like 7 years. Bernard King won 2 playoff series in essentially 3, So that's like, you're talking about success in the postseason. Bernard King has a big advantage. I do think longevity has to mean something when it comes to these conversations as well. But very interesting discussion. We've been talking about Carmelo Anthony, the Knick prolific scorer, retiring from the NBA on Monday. Where does Melo rank in your eyes among greatest small forwards of all time?
Ooh, who do we got up there? Obviously LeBron,
Larry Bird, Scottie Pippen,
KD,
Rick Barry, KD, Julius Erving, of course. Does he crack that top 10, you think?
Did we get to 10 yet? Havlicek? Is he considering him a small forward? Elgin Baylor?
I would say both those guys small forward, and Melo's not better than any of those guys. I don't think Melo's better than anybody I've named so far.
Agreed. I don't think he's in the conference. Melo, Dominique Wilkins. Who do you got?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I lean Neek.
Same.
Yeah, I think I lean Neek. That's a tough one, though.
Sustained success, a little tougher competition. Yeah, so I guess he's right outside the top 10. Let me look. Let me look online here.
Yeah,
Kawhi Leonard.
James Worthy
Is
and
James Worthy
Melo.
a small forward? More
Yeah,
power.
yeah. I mean, they started like
Yeah,
AC
yeah.
Green
Uh,
and Rambus is another Knicks
Melo,
legend.
Melo, or Paul Pierce? Who do you got?
I mean, Melo was a better player than Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce had, I think Paul Pierce is underrated. Like it's become the fun thing to dunk on Paul Pierce's career because he's so,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess,
yeah,
cocky about what he accomplished.
yeah.
But I
Right.
mean, Paul Pierce was an absolute killer, and I think people kind of need to remember kind of how good he was.
Finals MVP. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a big feather in his cap, man.
it is. It is. I probably would lean Paul Pierce.
I think so too.
I think Melo is a more talented player, but if I had a guy in terms of who I wanted for one game to win in a
Yes,
playoff game, I think I'd,
yes.
I'd take Paul Pierce. And Paul
Agreed.
Pierce, who was not as athletic or as Carmelo Anthony, was a much better defensive player. So I
Yes,
mean, I think
yes.
that would factor in as well. So you're probably
Definitely.
talking about Melo in that like 10 to 15 range. Is also Alex English, who's
Alex English.
underrated, one of the greatest small forwards of all time as well.
Yep.
Adrian Dantley was another scoring
Yeah.
machine in the 80s. There were a lot of guys in that 80s era, King, Dantley, English, where you're like, man, these guys played in any other era besides
Yes.
the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird era, because these guys have made it to an NBA championship at some
Good
point.
trivia question. Adrian Dantley led all players in scoring in the decade of the 1980s. Most points scored in 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of people don't know. That's one thing I love about the history of the game, and I wish more people really lived in it and really kind of embraced it. Like there are so many great players who have played in these leagues, and when we talk about ranking the likes of a Carmelo Anthony, who's a great player in his own right, we've talked about that a ton on this episode. Like there are so many guys though. When you say, okay, let's ratchet them up to the top 5 and the top 3, it's like we got to take a close look at these other guys and what they've accomplished as well.
100%. All that said, to even be in the conversation with these guys is a huge credit to Carmelo Anthony and his career.
Yeah.
And we should have prefaced this at the top. And fact of the matter is, Carmelo Anthony is a first ballot Hall of Famer.
100%.
No question, no debates. As easy a first ballot. Again, it's the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. It's not the NBA Hall of Fame. And as we discussed, national championship at Syracuse. One of the most decorated 3-time Olympic gold medalists, one of the most decorated U.S. Olympian athletes of all time, basketball players. So, and then you factor in the incredible NBA career. So, again, there are very few first surefire 100% first ballot Hall of Famers. Carmelo Anthony is one such player.
Absolutely. We're talking about the great Carmelo Anthony, who announced his retirement from the NBA. Okay, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.